Shavua Tov, Shana Tova, V'Gud Yom Tov. Welcome to video number 23 in our WhatsApp group. A minor point that emerges from this story is that even 150 years ago in Europe, governments did not hesitate to discriminate, to use a plague, the excuse of a plague, to discriminate against the religious practice of Orthodox Jews. I adopted this story from a treasury of Hasidic TTells, and I call it A Jew's Sukkah and God's Fruit Trees. Rabbi Mordechai of Nadvorna, at an early age, was orphaned, and he was taken in and raised by his great uncle, who was the renowned tzaddik Rabbi Mordechai of Nadvorna. He himself, Rabbi Mordechai, grew up to be a significant Rebbe, and hundreds, perhaps thousands of people flocked to him from Romania and Hungary to benefit from his blessings and his salvations. He himself apparently had a blessing that his descendants would also be, all of his descendants could also be Rebbes. And there's been an extraordinary number of Nadvorna Rebbes down through the generations, and even today there are many dozens in Jewish communities all around the world. One of them, by the way, was Rabbi Aaron Yechiel Leifer, who was the Nadvorna Rebbe of Sfat. And he passed away in 2000, and video number 4 in this series featured him. One year, an epidemic raged through Nadvorna. The municipality passed various regulations and warnings to the citizens about hygienic precautions in order to try to stem the spread of the contagion. Mordechai of Nadvorna, tzaddik of Nadvorna, so he built his sukkah as usual. But when the local judge found out about it, who was an evil man, he immediately sent someone to tell Rabbi Mordechai that he's obligated to immediately dismantle this structure that has vegetative matter. It's against the municipal health regulations, which it probably wasn't. But in any case, Mordechai chose to ignore this order. A few minutes later, or a certain number of minutes later, a squad of police arrived and threatened him with all kinds of punishments if he did not immediately dismantle this structure. Rabbi Mordechai just calmly said, "I built my sukkah in order for it to stand. I did not build it for it to be demolished." They went back and told the judge, who was very annoyed, and he issued a summons for Mordechai to appear right away in court. But Mordechai ignored this also. The judge, even angrier, decided he would take the matter into his own hands. He came down to where the sukkah was, and in a very firm voice said to Rabbi Mordechai, "You must take this down immediately. If you don't, there will be this and this punishment on you." And he said several severe things. Rabbi Mordechai, he wasn't fazed. He just simply repeated, "I built this sukkah to stand, and I did not build it to be demolished." The judge really flew into a rage then and started screaming at him and threatening him, and was probably about to start cursing him as well. But when he paused for breath, Mordechai, who remained tranquil under the screams and the threats, simply said to him, "I want you to know that my great uncle was Rabbi Mordechai of Nadvorna." The judge couldn't believe his ears. "Who cares who your great uncle was? Take this thing down, and that's it. That's the end of the matter." And Mordechai repeated, Rabbi Mordechai of Nadvorna was my great uncle. And before the judge could say a word, Mordechai very politely asked him to allow him to tell him, the judge, an interesting story. The judge was so surprised by this request, he briefly nodded his head, and Mordechai told him the following. There was once a priest who had 10 sons. The Eastern Orthodox priests were allowed to marry and have children. And these 10 sons were healthy and robust and strong like trees. This priest was also very wealthy. He owned an enormous amount of property, on a large portion of which he planted a very special orchard of a large variety of fruit trees. People used to love to come and just walk around and look at this beautiful orchard. As the biblical expression goes, it was pleasing to God and to man. One day, however, the priest decided that he could make this grove even more beautiful by planting flowers. So he chopped down a few of the trees, an insignificant percentage, plowed the ground over, and planted flowers. And it was a beautiful flower garden with a large variety of colors and fragrances. However, as soon as the garden was completed and the flowers arose, the oldest of the priest's 10 sons became ill, and he died. And shortly thereafter, his second son became ill, and he died. And the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth, and the seventh, and the eighth, and the ninth, they all became ill, mysteriously ill, and they died. The priest had summoned doctors, greater and greater doctors, and nobody had a clue what to do. In desperation, he turned to sorcery and consulting various black magic practitioners, which I'm pretty sure priests aren't allowed to do, but that didn't help either. At this point, some people suggested to him, why don't you go to the Jewish holy man, Rabbi Meir in Primishlan? It's said that he works wonders and that he has healed many people the doctors gave up on. What, a Jew? I should go to a Jew for help? The priest had difficulty digesting this idea. On the other hand, he was desperate to do whatever he could to save his final and youngest son, who was already weakening and ill, and and he had no other alternatives to follow, to explore. So he went. He explained to Reb Meir his situation, and said, and concluding with saying, and now my youngest son is sickly ill, and only heaven can help. Reb Meir thought a moment, and he looked at the priest and said, look, you planted a beautiful orchard of delightful trees, as they say, pleasing to God and to man. But then you decided to chop down some of the trees for flowers. Trees belong to God. So you cut down God's trees. God chopped down your trees. That's the explanation. But since you came to me, and since you still have some time left, I will promise you that I will pray for you and that your son will recover and be cured and be healthy. So that's what happened. Reb Meir prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the youngest son of the priest be cured, that this would be a great sanctification of God's name when people heard this story, which surely would spread. So Reb Mordechai finished telling the story to the judge, and then he said to the judge very clearly, and you, judge, are that 10th son. The judge dissolved in tears. He was weeping copiously. He begged Rabbi Mordechai to forgive him. He said, I know this story. It's true. He was so distraught. He kneeled before Mordechai and said, promise me that you'll forgive me. You can build 10 of these silly structures, but promise me that you'll forgive me. So Mordechai promised, and the judge left him alone, and Mordechai enjoyed his sukkah in peace. For the entire week of the festival. Mordechai of Nadvorna passed away in 1895 on the first day of Sukkot.